Andrij Dobriansky is the executive board member for the Ukrainian Congress Committee for America. The president not yet speaking, but there are all eyes on him right now. Pressure from Switzerland, pressure from Kiev, but almost a pardon from the Crimea area. So how do you marry all of these interests together?
By getting the truth out. You have reporters right now in the former presidential palace going through all of the president's papers. We've heard just this morning about the tens of billions. The the new prime minister of Ukraine has said it's $70 billion that the president and his family have taken from both IMF loans, from other grants, and the entire product of Ukraine for their own personal funds and put them in offshore accounts. So this is something that we need to put out to the world. We have reporters in his presidential palace going through those documents. There's a website out there called Yanukovych Leaks. All these documents are being put out there. The world can see what's happened in Ukraine.
We're seeing the flashes right now on the screen, so that is an indication that Viktor Yanukovych is approaching the podium, and as I speak, he actually is. We are going to take that image for you. We will wait just a moment for the sound to begin, but the fact that he is speaking,
dear colleagues,
we will let him speak now.
I'm glad to welcome.
It is now 8:30 Eastern Time. You are listening to a news conference by Ukrainian President, ousted Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. He is speaking to reporters from Rostov-on-Don in Russia, as opposed to the Ukraine. So far, he has told reporters, using measured words, that he believes what happened against him was terrorism, telling reporters that he was forced to leave Ukraine under threat of death, going on to say that members of his family were threatened. I am joined in studio right now by Andrij Dobriansky. He is the executive board member for the Ukrainian Congress Committee for America. Also, we are joined by satellite by Phil Ittner, who is in Moscow, and Nick Schifrin, who is in Kiev. Mr. Dobriansky, tell us, first of all, your thoughts about what you've heard so far.
I'm stunned. I've never seen a press conference like this ever. You see a president who's been deposed, who doesn't stay there to be prosecuted for his crimes, go to a neighboring country, speak on television there. The neighboring country does not extradite that president, but gives him a press conference. He speaks in Russian, not Ukrainian, which is the country that he's supposed to be representing, referring to the cities that he's visited in Russian. We know that's his first language. He was brought up as a governor of Donetsk, and prior to that, he was born in Donetsk when it was still referred to as Stalino. So after Stalin, he's referring to a Soviet culture there. He using keywords, talking points that we've seen on the internet already. He appeals to the veterans. That's not the veterans who are fighting the war. He's talking about the veterans of the Great War. He's referring to the great Soviet army. He's referring to fascists. That's not really talking about what we think that's Nazis. He's referring to the people in Ukraine who are his supporters as the fascists being literally the people who invaded your country 80 years ago. So that's the keywords he's using.
In fact, I want to go to Phil Ittner right now, who is in Moscow. Phil, the language that he is using to describe the people that we have been describing as protesters in the streets of Independence Square, he describes them as terrorists.
Bloodshed to happen.
Yeah, absolutely, Del. It has been very interesting to listen to some of the language that Viktor Yanukovych is using, because it is almost exactly word for word what we have also heard from the Russian Foreign Ministry and from the Kremlin, referring to the protesters as fascists, saying that they blame the West for basically putting Ukraine in this situation with that trade deal. An awful lot of things that we have heard also from the Russian government. So very interesting language being used down there in Rostov-on-Don. And also very interesting to hear of his movements once he left Kiev. Particularly interesting that he did flee to the eastern side of the country where he has his support base. A lot of interesting things coming out of this press conference.
Phil Ittner for us live in Moscow. We go from Phil Ittner in Moscow right now to Nick Schifrin, who is in Kiev at Independence Square. Nick, what are they saying? Have you heard any reactions so far from Independence Square in Kiev?
And military actions in this.
Del, I think it is fascinating to listen to this and hear President Yanukovych talk about the armed people should be off the street and that regular life should go on. Well, to be honest, regular life started about 24, 48 hours ago. You look back in the square behind me, no one is listening. No one is watching this press conference. There's no TV screen. There's no audio. There's no people gathered around any kind of department store window or anything like that. People have moved on. There are no armed people in this square anymore. There were perhaps a little while ago, but they would argue that they were much less armed than the armed police who were shooting at them. And these people simply have started their lives again. The parliament does have to deal with this from a political point of view. Not only what Phil and our guests were saying about those key words, but Yanukovych also said that the parliament that's been elected is not legitimate. And that is something that a lot of people in this country will be listening to and agree with, especially in the eastern Ukraine and Kharkiv, where he stopped on the way to Russia. We were there for a few days, and everybody there saying, whatever is happening in Kiev is not legitimate, it's a coup, and we won't listen to them. And that's the political concern. On the street, nobody, at least behind me, nobody cares. They've moved on. But politically, this parliament needs to worry about this press conference because they know that there are millions and millions of Ukrainians in the east who are listening and saying, yes, that's right, the parliament in Kiev is not legitimate, we do not have to listen to them. If our president is saying we don't have to, then we won't. And that threatens the unity of this country. And that perhaps threatens it much more than Crimea. Crimea has always been a problem for Kiev, has always really not wanted to be part of an independent Ukraine ever since Ukraine got its independence after the Soviet Union broke up. But Eastern Ukraine is different. And if there is a concern in this city right now, it's about Eastern Ukraine and people in Eastern Ukraine listening to President Yanukovych and turning their backs on Kiev and looking toward Russia as Kiev and the western part of the country look toward the west.
Nick Schifrin in Kiev, please stand by. Mr. Dobriansky, I am listening to the president, and we continue to monitor what he is saying so that nothing will be missed. But I am surprised that no one has asked him what seems to be the perfunctory question, which is, did you order Ukrainian police to fire upon Ukrainian people? Are you surprised like I am?
Yes, absolutely. Even more than the economic malfeasance that we are discovering more and more through his papers, we know that, for instance, he ordered the head of the armies of the joint armies of Ukraine to construct a plan. We know the plan.
In fact, that's what I was going to bring up. Hoda Abdelhamid, one of our correspondents yesterday, reported that among the documents that were found in the presidential palace were those charts that showed how they were supposed to move in, how the power supply was supposed to be cut, and how the forces were to open. These are, in fact, that is her report that we're looking at. They are pouring over thousands of documents right now. Those documents being dumped into the river as if there was something to hide. You see them right now being thawed, I guess, in the sauna. The documents showing charts, graphs, everything indicating that the president not only was preparing to flee, but also preparing to squelch the opposition.
This is the second time that the president wanted to do this. Of course, he was elected first in 2004. That was overturned by the Orange Revolution. At that time, we know that he also wanted the army to move against the people in the square. This is the second time that he wanted to have that happen, and he ordered the chief of the army to do that. The army chief resigned. He was dismissed for not following through on this. He has since been reinstated by the new acting president of Ukraine to keep military control in the hands of Ukrainians. So it's absolutely abominable, the fact that this man ordered this. Not only the hundreds of people who were killed, over 100 people who were killed on the Maidan by snipers, the Berkut, but he actually wanted armed military interference with the People's Revolution.
Nick Schifrin in Kiev, one of the major things, one of the major developments that we have been watching are the Russian military movements on the border. The fact that Viktor Yanukovych is in Russia, that he is speaking in Russian, and that the Russian government appears to be giving him asylum must be of major concern not only to the U.S. government, but to those in Kiev as well.
Yeah, certainly. And there's a discussion ongoing right now in the parliament behind me talking about extradition, talking about whether they should ask Russia to send him back to Ukraine to try him for everything you guys have just been talking about. Not only the tens of billions of dollars that these documents seem to suggest that he had a say in, but also those armed police who were on the streets behind me, who were shooting at protesters, some of whom had guns like hunting weapons, but most of whom had plastic shields and were literally walking into the bullets. And so there's a big concern about whether President Yanukovych should come back, what happens to that, who's in authority as to whether they can try him, would he ever come back even if they tried to do that. So all of that is very early days. But again, on the street behind me, the people themselves who are in the Maidan, in Independence Square, they are not listening to this. They do believe that they've moved on, that they've chosen a new government. There's already a schedule for the next presidential elections. They are creating a schedule for the next parliamentary elections. President Yanukovych was talking about having a referendum, but a lot of people here say everything's been decided already. He fled. That chapter is over for us. We've moved on.
Nick Schifrin in Kiev, thank you very much. 8:37 right now. The ousted president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, speaking now for about 36 minutes to catch you up to date as to what he told reporters. The first thing he said emphatically was, when asked, when I guess it was inferred that he may have fled the country, he defiantly said there was no such thing as flight. He simply feared for his life. This is from the news conference earlier.
Nobody overthrew me. I was forced to leave the Ukraine under the immediate threat to my life and life of my family.
We're following dramatic events coming out of Russia right now. That is the ousted president of Ukraine. He has been speaking now for a little more than a half an hour. We continue to monitor his comments. We are monitoring them from Kiev. We are monitoring them from Moscow. We are watching the developments unfold in New York. I'm Del Walters in New York. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. We are also watching those developments that are coming out of Russia right now, where ousted Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych has been speaking now for a little less than an hour, pretty much denying most of the things that he is being accused of, including the fact that he is a wanted man on charges of murder. Andrij Dobriansky, the executive board member for the Ukrainian Congress, has been with us in studio. He has been watching. We also have our Nick Schifrin, who is in Kiev, who is watching the events from Independence Square there. But I want to go to you first, and the fact that he is pretty much, as you said, in a state of denial.
Yes, using contrary terms to what we've seen the revolution broadcast live for 3 months since November on different internet news feeds. You can just watch what's happening in the square the whole time. And the president's ex-president's recollection of those events are of armed insurrectionists, which we did not see much of for months and months. Well, we're seeing armed insurrection. We're seeing that in Crimea now. We're seeing that in areas that are controlled by random biker gangs and different thugs that have been hired by the president's team. So it's a flipping of reality, just like you said.
In fact, just a moment ago, this is what the former president had to say about the issue of elections in Ukraine. Take a listen.
He's alive, and you see I'm alive. And if this president wasn't impeached in the parliament, he's still the acting president.
Nick Schifrin in Kiev. As you heard Mr. Dobriansky say, the former president of Ukraine speaking Russian. Is this an attempt, from what you are hearing from people that are watching the events there in Kiev, to divide the Ukraine even more than it is already divided between those who favor the European Union and those who favor stronger and closer ties with Russia?
I think, Del, perhaps it's a way to tap into the divide and tap into the people who literally speak his language and feel that he is still their legitimate leader. You go east of Kiev, and everyone speaks Russian. You go to Kharkiv, about a 4-hour train ride, an hour flight from here, and you have to speak Russian on these streets. Even the people who are pro-Western in that city speak Russian. And so what the president is perhaps trying to do is to reach into those areas that are historically very pro-Soviet, pro-Russian today, and say, look, I am still your leader. But again, he's not here. He's not in this country. And if you go to Kiev, and you go to the west, certainly, of Kiev, but even in Independence Square and around it, nobody's really listening to this. Everybody is focused on the future. They do feel here that they have a new government, that they have a schedule for the next presidential elections, that they have elected a new cabinet, and that they want and are going to get very soon a new election for the parliament. And so you listen, or at least the other people from here listen to the president speak about armed gangs. We're still in Independence Square behind me, about how daily life needs to resume. And you look at the square and you look at this city. I mean, I can go out to dinner, I can go out to lunch, I can go shopping today in Kiev. Nobody is stopping me from that. And so there is a disconnect, not only politically, what you've just been talking about, but physically on the ground. And you talk to people in the square now, they're not really listening, they're not paying attention, and there's certainly no armed gangs walking around this square right now. When it's organized, there's some 50,000 people giving yays or nays to the new politicians who are running the government now. And so that's what they're focused on here. Of course, politically, there's a concern of what Yanukovych says, especially tapping into that notion in the East of a pro-Russian sentiment and away from the rest, which is what Kiev is trying to do. But really on the ground here, Del, there is no sense of alarm based on what he's saying.
Nick Schifrin for us in Kiev. Nick, thank you very much. Mr. Dobriansky, we have about a minute left, a little less than a minute. Going forward, as we hear the former president talk, how important are the facts in this? The fact that they didn't loot the presidential palace, they preserved the documents. 20 seconds.
It's all about the facts. It's all about, we've been broadcasting the revolution live. Yanukovych Leaks is live on the internet. All those documents you mentioned are being put out onto the web. We're going to make sure that everything gets to the public, so the whole world can see it, and we'd like to have those crimes prosecuted.
Mr. Dobriansky, thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for being with us. This is Al Jazeera American.